welcome to Jorgy Stripping the Dipping. It's your boy AMG Denz, and I'm trying to dip some nuggets in sauce, boy. I'm telling you. And it's some time. I don't know the rest, something about like relaxing and rewinding. But nonetheless, my horrible analogies and singing aside, we have regular guest and returner to the show, Dr.Obbs, our tech legend. How are you doing today, Dr.Obbs?
I'm doing great, Denz. How are you doing?
Man, I'm trying not to melt, and that's another thing. For all of our Dutch listeners as well, I need you to write in Kom je holla Georgie, which is translations for Georgie, I'm coming to get you. Because Georgie, just for those who don't know in our week's recap, Georgie was spotted on the gram, in 4K eating ice cream without AMG Denz. Breaking news, everybody.
Ooh.
So yeah, there's like a huge bounty on Georgina's head right now. If anybody can find Georgina and the ice cream that she owes me, that's about maybe, I don't know, 5 magnums. Maybe I throw in a Mr. Whippies in there too for 99p.
Hey, stick with Ben and Jerry, man. Stick with that.
Hey, well, I'll be expecting my caramel chew and my cookie dough. So make sure you have it, George. Because
Ooh, you
you
can't pass up Chubby Hubby. In the U.S., we have Chubby Hubby Ben and Jerry, so that's
enlighten me, man. What,
some of
what
the
flavor is
best.
that?
It's like caramel and pretzel and chocolate, man. I'm a total like a sweet and savory kind of a guy. Like I love salty and sweet together. So that's the top right there. It's called Chubby Hubby, man. It will make you fat.
Oh man. Well,
That's why I
I
don't
know.
eat it so much.
Well, I was gonna say I know Red Bull trying to like work on the weight savings, but me right now, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind. But
I'm
no,
already drooling.
you see, and what a way to start the podcast. So, guys, just yeah, it's been an interesting week in the world of Formula One. We return to Montreal, Canada, for the Canadian Grand Prix around the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Really interesting circuit, with so many landmark moments. You had Jenson Button literally stealing the race win off of Sebastian Vettel in 2011. You had Lewis Hamilton in his debut year win, around here too. That was his debut win for McLaren, which is crazy. I've even got the replica car for that little plug there too. And then yeah, we haven't been there in like what 2, 3 years. And the last time we were there, there was even more controversy because there was that race where Seb kind of locked up the rear brakes, went across the grass, said he made a mistake, but did he make a mistake? Asterisk mark. And then the FIA gave him a 5 second penalty, and I think that had to go down, Doctor Obbs. I don't know if you remember. It's really one of the most unpopular sporting decisions,
Oh yeah.
like for a while. Like, and as a Mercedes fan, obviously, maybe I'm a bit biased. I could see why the FIA like applied the letter of the law, and they just kind of said, well, a driver went off the circuit, then he didn't rejoin safely enough. He caused another driver to try and avoid a collision. So I can see it from that perspective. But then obviously other people will look at it in terms of Seb drove the perfect race. And up until that mistake, because Canada's quite a hard circuit to overtake on, even with the DRS, he didn't really put a foot wrong. So there's been all of that kind of nostalgia to go through. And
Yeah,
again,
and
Dr. Obbs,
one of the things I really respect from that race though was after the race, Lewis said that, he didn't want to win that way. And I thought that was pretty cool too. He was quite humble in it, and but it produced for us one of the most epic gifts in racing, which is Seb grabbing the two and switching it with the one, right? At the end of the
oh
race.
man,
He
he
was
was
a
so
dog.
salty. He was so salty. I almost thought he was a saltfish patty for a second because he was salty. But I mean, that's the thing. It's emotions. Emotions obviously run high in any sport. And he genuinely believed had it not been for that mistake, which again kind of put him in that position, he should have won that race. And ultimately, it was at that time when Ferrari, they had a decent car, and right now it's almost like, Circa again, they have a decent car, but yet still things need to kind of fall into place. But we'll touch on that a bit later. But probably the key starting point, Dr. Obbs, that I want to kind of throw the floor to you on is finally the FIA again up off their backsides. They've taken off their jewelry detectors and their the inflammable pants for the time being, and they're trying to do something meanwhile quite worthy, and it's created a lot of controversy because to put it in a nutshell, after Baku and a number of the drivers coming out publicly just to say that, the actual driving quality standards of the cars were just absolutely abominable, and terrible to drive. You had Lewis Hamilton, there was a clip of him going around, I think, the last series of corners and catching a big whip of oversteer caused by him bottoming out. You had Pierre Gasly coming out as well and saying from Friday to Sunday he was on painkillers, and all these other things as well. So the FIA finally kind of done one of their primary roles, which is driver safety. And from this week, they've basically said that they're going to introduce measures where they're going to be like looking at the cars and trying to follow them a bit more closely to come up with some sort of measurement requirement, which they can use as a formula going forward in the future to kind of measure the porpoising and perhaps add a minimum requirement that the cars don't go below a certain point or they don't porpoise as much. Dr. Obbs, you're the technical guy and you're the genius out of all three of us. So could you elaborate on it further and just kind of explain what's going on and how it will be implemented going forward?
Yeah, so I think there's still a little bit to be understood about it because the FIA hasn't come out so much and been very explicit about exactly what they're going to do. We thought they were going to implement it here at the Canadian GP, but they decided that they were just only going to use this as more of like a data gathering circuit session. So they'll be able to take a look at the vertical G accelerations and see what sort of loading the cars are experiencing on this track, and especially in this track where it is quite bumpy. I think we've already seen it from FP1 and FP2. It is a bumpy track. I did definitely notice that a lot of teams are running more ride height now. They are higher than they were in Baku for sure. But it basically goes down like this, and it's a lot like what Bryson Sullivan was saying ahead of time. It's a lot like what the Driver 61 guys came out and produced a video with Craig Scarborough. Essentially, they said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to establish a G load limit. So a vertical G limit. And that vertical G limit will be track specific because every track is different. So they'll probably use FP1, for instance, to find what the loads are and then set the limit. And then the teams are going to have to get below that load limit by the end of FP3. And what I've heard, because I know a few people who are a bit connected in the teams, and what the teams are saying is that they're going to have 6 laps. They're going to have 6 laps at the end of FP3, in which case then after that, they're going to have to submit their setup, their race setup that they had. They're going to have to submit their data for the vertical G accelerations to the FIA. And then as long as they're under, they're good to go. If they're not under, they're going to incur a penalty, and that penalty will be that they'll have to raise their ride height by 10 millimeters. Now, 10 millimeters, Denz, is huge. It is massive. I mean, these guys are changing half a millimeter, 1 millimeter to extract performance. Think about that. That's 10 times that. So 10 or 20 times that. So it's a huge penalty. So that is definitely enough motivation for teams to get under, because if you're having to raise by 10 millimeters, and that's kind of drawing the ire of the comments from Mercedes, right, who's saying, look, we might not even have 10 millimeters to give, if we need to raise it, because they're saying that their suspension travel is limited. But that's essentially what they're trying to do, and what we're hearing is that this accelerometer, so you use an accelerometer and the cars are already fitted with it. This accelerometer will be placed at the center of gravity of the car, so it's the point where all of the forces and loads and everything act, is the center of gravity, and they'll be placing it there. So it's the best place to put it. I have a lot of questions, Denz, about how they're going to do this. What happens if it's raining during FP3, right? And everybody's, having to go a bit slower because of the rain. What happens if with the fuel loads, for instance, we've seen in the porpoising data that as the fuel burns off on some of the cars, the porpoising gets worse, and on other cars, it gets better. So how are you going to establish what fuel loads everybody has to run? So there's a lot of things I think that they're going to have to sort out.
I definitely agree with you there, Dr. Ubbs, and thank you as well for that really good explanation, because there's just been so much media chatter, and because I feel the FIA haven't directly come out themselves, like you said earlier, it's been a lot of us is kind of picking a piece, kind of the information, just trying to make sense of it. But I think your kind of eulogy there was brilliant for that, and in a sense too, like yeah, I agree with you. There's so many questions, kind of more raised, I guess, than answered, more raised. little pun there, but kind of what I wanted to do as well, just on the topic of this one too, Dr. Obbs, is kind of throw you a double-barreled question in the sense of, well, a, how easy will it be for the FIA to monitor the porpoising? Because as you mentioned, you already kind of semi answered the question there. Like there's so many different variations and so many different anomalies that could completely change the reading or kind of how they measure it going forward, and obviously the track position, what engine modes they're running, how much fuel they have in the car, obviously plays a role in that. And then secondly of all as well, which is more the moral question, because your boy Max kind of said it in the Friday kind of media day. How fair is it for the FIA to change the rules, or should I say, implement these rules midway into a season? Because there are many drivers, obviously, like, and I don't want to just use Mercedes because it's not just them that have been vocal about porpoising. And in fact, they actually came out and said that in Baku, it wasn't necessarily porpoising they were suffering from. It's just an extremely harsh setup which they required to get the most out of the car. But you've had some people like Lewis and Gasly come out and say that, this was needed by the FIA. It's good that this intervention came in because driver safety is paramount, which I absolutely agree with. But then on the flip side too, obviously Max came out and said that it's almost against the spirit of the sport, to bring these rules in because there are some teams that have a better handle of the porpoising than others, and then obviously it depends on the human being too. Some people have like more, I guess, stiffer spines. You get like the ancient warriors like Fernando Alonso that still thinks he's like 19 and probably is in denial about any kind of back pain. So it's also kind of gets like a subjectivity kind of thing too, and like how people are affected by it. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at the end of the day, honestly, this is probably the best result that that I think Red Bull could have hoped for. I think Red Bull's maybe only gripe is going to be around adding the second floor stay, which is being allowed. And if you recall, Red Bull originally had enough rigidity in their floor that they did not require a floor stay. So when they added the ability for teams to now run one floor stay, they kind of had a problem with it. And so now teams are able to run two floor stays. So again, they're going to have more problem with it. But I think the G limit um, is actually the best situation for them because if anybody's should have less of an issue with this, it will be Red Bull because they seem to have it under control. Now, naturally, I just want to remind everybody listening that just because something is not happening now does not mean that it won't happen in the future, right? I think we've seen that teams in these cars react differently to tracks, so it is entirely possible that Red Bull could bounce, at other tracks in the future. But they should feel quite good about this because it's not penalizing them. And what it is doing though is forcing the other teams that have this issue to sort that issue out. And probably that issue is going to have to be sorted through race setup, through track setup, where they're going to have to raise the ride height. So I think if anything, Red Bull should honestly be happy about this. I really don't understand the complaint. I think it's more along the floor stay side of things. From the Mercedes side, yeah, they're telling us that in Baku it really wasn't porpoising, it was bouncing. But either way, bouncing is also related to ride height. So if you are so low to the ground that now you've got the entire boat section, the underside of the car right there, and the T tray, the very front or the rear, that is bouncing with the bumps in the road, and your suspension is so stiff that it can't actually damp it out, then it's still a problem with ride height, right? You've got too low of a ride height. So what the FIA has done is essentially taken that decision out of the hands of the teams, right? And what I told my wife, I was trying to explain this whole situation to my wife, who, by the way, is not an F1 fan and really cannot understand my obsession with it. Um, but what I told her is I said, okay, think about it. It's sort of like this. It's like the FIA came to the teams and sent them to their room and told them to think about their behavior. That's basically what the FIA did,
Yeah.
right? Is it said, all right, guys, go back now and you're going to have to think about what you're doing and the decisions that you're making, and we're going to establish this limit. So now you're going to have to fix it. And that's basically what they did. So I have no issues with them coming in mid-season and doing this. I think, we can't put Lewis through what he went through again. That's just, that's not right. I mean, to see anybody, I don't care if it's Lewis or any other driver, right? Drivers are human beings and they deserve to, uh, you know, not have their health at risk when they drive their race car if it's under their control, right? So it's the same thing with the safety regulations where they, again, a long time ago, took the decision out of the hands of the team. Why? Because teams were sacrificing safety for weight. They were cutting corners in the monocoque and basically the safety pod to make it lighter at the expense of safety. So what did you have? You had people dying when they would go into the walls at high speeds, right? And what did the FIA do? They took that out of their hands and they said, "Look, you must pass these crash tests." So it's, to me, it's no different. I think they have a precedent here and they're just following that precedent.
I agree with you there, Dr. Obbs. It's so true, and also kind of to caveat those points as well. Lewis is very vocal in the kind of media, and he was just saying that this new generation of Formula we have is still in its quite infant stages, and ultimately the cars are going to continue to evolve and develop, and it'd be a shame, that you're stuck with these cars. So imagine for the next 4 or 5 years, it would suck to have these cars that like behave so badly and are so poor in terms of the ride quality and obviously the long-term effects that can have on people's health, like you alluded to as well. And again, it's Formula One, man. Like it's what we call the pinnacle of motorsport. So the thing that these cars are bouncing up and down more than like me on GTA doing stuff I shouldn't be doing says it all, really. So yeah, just it is a bit kind of sus, and I get it from a competitive element why people might be aggrieved, or like if they feel it's going to affect them, they might take a kind of view on it. But ultimately, I always felt that with this new generation of F1, it was always going to be trial and error. It might not have been like a success out of the blocks, which I think is what people have put an expectation on the FIA to do. So many years of research went into it, but there's so much more to it. And we even had like F1 Jordan, shout out to him, do an episode with us kind of behind the scenes, and he was just mentioning that the teams have struggled kind of initially because of just the differences, in just what you can do in a wind tunnel and the speeds you run in a wind tunnel compared to obviously running in real life, and even just the software you use for your calculations and stuff like that. It can't, like, there's certain things that aren't a substitute for real life, So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's just been so kind of key just to kind of see how it's worked out. And again, what we're on round 7, round 8, so whilst I guess it's always going to be a race of which team can sort it out the quickest. Imagine that this, like, when you think of Formula One, I don't want people to think of the old generation, or to think about 2019, 20. People probably need to look at this Formula One as just completely a new formula, like we're back in 1950s, for example, and it's just a completely new
Absolutely.
sport, because that's what it's ultimately come down to, so there's been
Yeah.
so many different things. But then
Yeah,
on
and
that,
it's I was just, sorry, I was just going to expand on that. And that's the thing that, every fan of every team has to understand. I think naturally Mercedes with their, record, I mean, 8 constructors titles, right, in a row, I think, isn't it? Yeah, I think I got that right.
yeah,
They've had a long run of success, and I see a lot of people obviously upset on Twitter and such with the performance and things, and but people do have to recognize that they wiped the slate completely clean. They started over, and I think we said this in one of the earlier podcasts that I was on with you guys, is that some teams are going to get it right, some teams are going to get it wrong, and some teams are going to get it in the middle. And as time goes on, it's going to converge. And the teams are going to, I mean, we're already starting to see some of the convergence, right? Think about I talk tech, right? So I look at all the technical convergence. I mean, one of the things you see right away is that, I mean, the most obvious is the Aston Martin, right? Kind of adopting a bit more of the Red Bull design. You've even also seen it now with Alpine. Remember the Alpine on their side pod? They added that little curvature, that cut in their side pod, just like Red Bull has as well. Now Alpine is extended and moved their air intake forward, and they've created kind of an undercut like Red Bull has again. Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes took the front bib wings. So on the double T tray, took that from Aston Martin, right? So you're seeing a lot of the technical convergence, and that's going to continue to happen. And as that happens, the teams are going to start to get a bit closer and closer together.
Exactly that, and I'm glad you mentioned just Alpine as well, and Aston Martin, to be fair, Dr. Obbs, because we've seen glimpses, and it's more been on like Alonso's side, where, for example, in Austria, or not Austria, Australia even, he looked like he was going to set one of the really great laps until he had that hydraulic issue. And then we saw in Baku that the Alpine was one of the fastest cars in the speed traps, which is very rare for them. And then again, they've repeated that again this week because they've been fastest in the speed traps again. And Alonso has consistently been in the top five, this weekend as well. So there's been a lot of developments for them, and then also Aston Martin, like you mentioned too, with the green ball as we touted it as the time. But yeah, just even them, like, and it's been interesting, and actually I've been very impressed with them because they essentially have a completely new spec of car, and it's only what in its third race now, and already every week we're seeing it go up and up and up the pecking order, more and more too. And like you mentioned there, it's expectation versus reality. Of course, when you support a team, you want them to kind of hit the blocks running from the get. But sometimes slow and steady wins the race, and ultimately Seb, more so on Seb's kind of side, he's been kind of putting the car more in the realms where I guess Aston Martin would be looking for with the kind of restructuring phase that they're going through right now. And I have no doubt, that Stroll in his home race, he's going to be picking up an extra 50 horsepower maybe from the fans. So, yeah, it's really interesting, and that's also the kind of headache Mercedes, for example, have too, because it's not just a case that they can bring parts or solve something, and it might bring them closer to Red Bull and Ferrari, but of course you got other teams as well, like McLaren, Alpine, and Aston Martin, even the AlphaTauris from time to time as well on the more like low speed circuits. They seem to be a bit more prominent too. So there's so many different variations and traits that suit certain cars. Even like Zhou Guan Yu was having a really amazing race last week too. And well, we'll get into this now. It's gonna actually be the perfect segue, to be honest, Dr. Obbs. Is Ferrari, man, what is happening with those prancing horses and that PU? Because we had Sainz last week with a hydraulic issue, I believe, and then Charles Leclerc with what could have been another turbocharger, like four turbochargers this season. Like Charles Leclerc has more turbochargers than my AMG does outside, and that has two, but he's used four. So yeah, like it's just been a bit nuts. And I guess obviously from the Red Bull perspective, you'll be licking your lips there, Dr. Obbs, and saying, yeah, boy, that's us at the beginning of the season, but we
Yeah.
managed to get on top of it. And now, the Cinderella's shoe is on the other foot to say. But yeah, like sticking with Ferrari and maybe the Ferrari power teams, what's your take been with these reliability issues they've had so far?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely empathize with how they're feeling. As you said, we started out the season with a couple of just abysmal DNFs. I mean, the double DNF in Bahrain still makes me sweat. But I know how they're feeling. I really can't explain kind of what's going on because we're, like we said, like 8 races into the season, and then now these issues are cropping up. So it tells me that it's not like a fundamental sort of like a design problem. Maybe it's some kind of a long-term wear, long-term reliability issue that they're having, right? And I've heard, that it's an MGUK problem that's causing all their issues. So all the kinetic energy recovery that they're doing with the MGUK, that there's a fundamental issue with that. And that, people are saying that it's not the PU, it's the MGUK, and that's causing, the PU to run under stress as a result of it. But you never know what you can really trust out of the Italian media at times, right? So,
I was going to
um,
say that, Dr. Obbs, as well. Let me just interject there, sorry,
yeah,
before you
yeah.
continue as well. Just, if it is an MGUK problem there, Dr. Obbs, is that not absolutely catastrophic around like circuit like um Canada, for example? Because we've seen like I'll jog your memory back to 2014 when we had the two silver beasts in Lewis and Nico going around, and they were pushing so hard on the brakes and kind of relying on the engine braking done by the MG UK as well with the kinetic energy that both of them managed to make the MG UK fail. And it's just one of those things where around Canada there's lots of heavy braking kind of events, and because the brake discs themselves are so like small, there's more emphasis on that MGUK element to kind of get the braking done and stop the car. And ultimately as well around a track like Canada, isn't that more concerning, wouldn't
Yeah,
you think?
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's why you've seen Charles is now taken, the fourth PU. He ran the third one in FP1 and FP2 just to get it into the pool. And then now they're taking the fourth one, so he's taking a 10 place grid penalty. Yeah, absolutely. They're doing it because of that reason, I would think. You've got 6 heavy braking zones here, and you absolutely need that MGUK because, as you said, I mean, you can't do it all with the brakes. So this is definitely going to be a track where it's going to stress the system. So could we see another failure? If it's a failure that's resulting from long-term wear, then theoretically, no, for a new unit, right? But if it's a fundamental design issue, then in that case, you could see it. So I'll be definitely interested to see if they have an issue with it.
Of course. And then also, I guess what makes it even more scary also is that it's not even just the like factory team either. It's the customer teams that are being affected by this because we had Magnussen, I think, with a retirement last week. I know for a fact we had Guan Yu Zhou as well, or Zhou Guan Yu with that failure too. And I think there was like a list, Dr. Obbs. I don't know if you saw this circulate on Twitter too, but there was like a list showing you like how many laps have been led by each team. And then the bottom four was literally all the Ferrari powered team. So what's your kind of read been on that too?
Yeah, I saw that. It was really pretty sad. I don't know. I think certainly the Ferrari power unit. I mean, we know it's strong, right? And it's been strong since the beginning of the season. They've got great corner exit speed. Um, Frankly, they've got great corner entry speed too. So I would think that the MGUK and then the ERS, basically the whole entire ERS system is working well, right? If you've got good corner entry and corner exit, um, but somehow they're having these reliability issues. Is it working so well because they're pushing it to the limit, though? Right? Because for an engineering design, you've got your performance point where you can reliably extract performance from a design, whether it's a PU or MGUK or MGUH, whatever it is. You can reliably extract performance at a certain performance limit. And then you can go above that performance limit at the detriment of reliability. Why? Because everything is now going up, whether it's the internal combustion pressures, it's the stress on the bearings, the heat that's generated in the sliding components or the rotating joints. Um, all of that is what you as an engineer have to take a decision on. How far am I willing to push it at the expense of reliability? I think Alpine has been very clear on what they want to do, right? They said like all go. Like we we're not going to worry too much about reliability. We just want to go fast. And that's what they're doing, right? Did Ferrari take that decision? Is Ferrari's power unit and their car and corner entry and corner exit so powerful and so strong because they're pushing everything to the limits, and this is why that they're having their issues? I don't know. I mean, that's only something that really the teams are going to understand. Is it related to the new fuel that we're running as well? I know teams, had apparently Ferrari had started working on this, new engine on this new fuel long before anybody else. So theoretically, they should have it in hand. So my initial feeling is that it's possible that they could be running their systems, their performance generating systems, the ERS system, the PU, everything. Um, a little bit above the limits that they normally would for good reliability. And this is one of the reasons why they're having the performance that they're having. Because remember, they've got an intense amount of pressure on them, right, to perform, especially this year. And they could be just taking a little bit of liberties and reliability for performance.
Yeah, I think that's a great read as well there, Dr. Obbs, because it's one of those ones where sometimes they're just in their own league in terms of race pace. Like we got to bear in mind as well that Charles Leclerc was leading, the Barcelona Grand Prix a couple of weeks ago, and that was, I think, a fresh engine too, a new specification one too, and it just seemed to be like he was in his own kind of class, and then you had that turbo failure, which again we're kind of trying to derive where the root of that problem was, but yeah, you can see that they really are trying to push because obviously Red Bull, on the other hand, they're bringing upgrades and trying to find windows, to get this RB18 even more competitive, whether it's in quali or in race trim. And it's just so intriguing just to kind of see how this battle is going to play out. And like we kind of alluded to when we first started this question, like it's Red Bull that had all the technical issues and still kind of do with the DRS and all the other kind of gadgets that they have too. But now it's Ferrari that are really trying to catch their tail. And for the championship, which is the next segue I wanted to get into, Dr. Ubbs, it's absolutely vital because now it went from being like, Ferrari versus Red Bull fight, and now to looking like it could be, Mad Max versus Sergio cheat on my wife Perez in terms of the championship. Because again, sensational drive by Perez in Monaco. Just really seemed to be dialed in. And then again he out qualified Max again in Baku too. It's been interesting just to see this resurgence of Perez, just to see how much he's got dialed in with this new generation of car as well there, Dr. Obbs. What have you made just in relation to this? And could you see Perez sustaining this type of performance in relation to Max, or do you think he's just on like a purple patch right now?
I think Sergio, number one, is an exceptional driver. I mean, he certainly proved that, right? I think so far this year. Last year he was still getting his feet under him a little bit, I think, but certainly this year he's proven that he's a driver that should be taken seriously. He's not just a number two driver, right? So he absolutely has a chance that he could win the driver championship this year. Um, the car has been set up in a way, and I don't think it's necessarily set up. I think it's just the design of the car itself that um, it was a bit understeery, and meaning that it had a tendency to slide through the corners, which Max doesn't like. So the car suits Checo better than it does Max, and Max has been complaining about it. But the Canadian GP so far is quite interesting because when you look at FP1, FP2, I mean, the results so far, and then, if you can believe the reports that are coming out through the media, the reports are that Red Bull has done something with their car, although they didn't have any upgrades for this race that were not reported. So maybe it is a setup change, that they found something that allows the car to be a bit more pointy, a bit more directional in the corners like Max likes. And if you believe that, then the results in FP1 and FP2 make sense. When you look at Max being the top of the timings for both, and then you look at Checo, for FP1, Checo was down in fourth, and in FP2, Checo's all the way down, and where's he at 11th? So um, it could, it could sort of jive. Those two things could jive. Maybe the car setup has been changed in a way that now it's just a better setup at this track for Max, who likes a more pointy car. Maybe it's just a track issue potentially, but I really think that Sergio is an intelligent driver. He knows the car. He knows how to get it set up in the right way. I think he will find a good setup for this race, but I think historically in all the other races that we've been in, um, his performance has been because he's just really good at understanding what he can get out of the car and being very patient with it. Whereas Max, I think, is probably driving a bit more frustrated and has been struggling in the past, few races as a result of it. But I mean, except for Baku, right? I mean, Baku Max had exceptional pace. He had much better pace than Checo, and and when he passed Checo, he was lapping 1 second faster than Checo at that time, so he passed him quite easily. But and then after that, they were both kind of managing their pace and their tires and such. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I know Red Bull is really pushing to try to get a car that Max is happy with. Are they going to take some design liberties that changes the design to where it suits Max better, and then all of a sudden doesn't suit Checo? If that happens, I think we'll see it in the results. And then Checo will certainly start being a bit more vocal about it. And I cannot imagine. I mean, Twitter's going to lose their mind if that happens, right? So
Yeah, it's always the case as well, Doctor. I think that's a great, to touch on that point as well. It's a very interesting take there, actually, because you're right. Perez has always been able to have like a much better race car on Sundays. And you've seen this throughout his entire career. It's never really been about qualifying well. It's always been about like tire preservation and trying to do everything you can to build the best car on a Sunday, of course. And you can really say honestly, this season that's worked in his favor, and he's had some really immaculate results. He's really like pushed and been more prevalent at the front, challenging Max and Leclerc, even if it's still not quite, within like a tenth or two tenths, but close enough anyways. But another thing, and I think Georgina might actually have to check my blood pressure, because for once in a while I might actually be giving Max some credit. But I just wanted to touch on this as well, like Dr. Obbs here too. Like, what have you made of Max's mentality this season? And like, to me, we're starting to see a more maturing driver, because one thing I picked up just looking at the Sky Sports coverage was they asked Max just, what has he thought about the season so far, things that he could improve. And like you highlighted, he seemed like a man possessed. He's not leaving any stone unturned. He wants to wrap this championship up by the Belgium Grand Prix if he could. I know it's probably mathematically impossible, but he does not want stress. He doesn't want that Lewis Hamilton stress, from last season. Like, he wants to wrap this thing up early so he can go and play iRacing with his friends. Like, he's made it abundantly clear that he's still not quite happy with the car. He's saying that, yeah, he's been able to drive the car well in the race. But then I think a good point he mentioned, and just again, it's just that hindsight, because I think a year or two ago, you wouldn't have heard Max say something like this. He would have just been like, I'm gonna attack people, I'm gonna run them off the road, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to win. But in this interview I was watching, Dr. Obbs, he said, you know what, we also need to make this car more superior in qualifying, because it's not good enough to be second or third place in quali, because there are certain tracks that you can't overtake on, even with this new formula of car, which is supposed to be easier to follow. So even that kind of mindset of, yeah, I've got one of the fastest cars on the grid, but that's still not good enough. I want the OP car. I want the W11 of Red Bulls right now. Like, that's how far I'm willing to go. Like, one, I have to commend, just like how seriously he's taking it, because I think my asterisks around him was, how motivated would he be to go for another championship after last year's events? Then, secondly of all, as well, it seems that he's actually maturing and becoming a more like rounded driver, in his approach to wheel racing with other guys. Also, this is his sight for development and the future prospect of the car. What have your thoughts been on that?
I think Max definitely does seem to be driving as more of a mature driver this year for sure. Um, how much of that is because he knows that they have a strong car, right? And that, compared to, their rivals that, I mean, Ferrari it's really been a Red Bull Ferrari battle, so far this whole season. And, from race to race, it's always kind of been, where's Ferrari going to be at? Where's Red Bull going to be at? And I think Max is he's relishing and enjoying that competition, but I think he is more relaxed because he feels like, in terms of the race pace, that they'll have an edge on Ferrari. And generally it seems like, most races they have had it to an extent, and then maybe didn't have the quality pace, but he always knew he could catch it up during the race. So how much of that is because he's just a bit more relaxed and more confident in where they are with the car, um, and how much of it is truly that he is maturing? I think the way to really tell would be, if something happens and then all of a sudden Red Bull's behind, right? And now maybe Ferrari's out front, or one of the other teams, Mercedes finds the golden key that unlocks the full potential. And then now, Mercedes is ahead of Red Bull. Um, how will he react then? Because I did see a lot of his frustrations when he was having the issues with the DRS, and I saw a little bit of old Max come out then, and who knows? Who knows if it's a long lasting case, right, where he is truly matured, or if it's just a matter of that he's just more confident, and from that confidence comes maturity. Because I know for me, if I'm confident in something, I'm gonna definitely be a lot less stressed out, and I'm gonna be way more mature about my perspective on things, versus if I feel like I'm playing catch up or I feel like I'm behind, I'm going to be way more stressed out. I'm going to be pressing and pushing, right? A lot more. And when you press and push, you make mistakes.
Exactly that, and I think you hit the nail on the head really brilliantly there. I think it's really a combination of probably both things, being in a much better position this year, but then also maturing. But that is for me the mentality like a championship driver should have, like not settling for less, or not like, still trying to find ways that you can improve. And even though it's funny for me being a Mercedes fan, hearing him like self implode on the radio, it's because he cares, and it's because he doesn't need to lose like what he has. He wants to kind of continue to build and grow and, like I guess further his career in Formula One, which, no one, doesn't matter what fan you are, like you have to kind of take your hat off and kind of in ways admire it, I suppose. And yeah, just like and it's just funny that he's just so like, even though Red Bull is still kind of one of the best teams right now, he still got his foot on their neck because he's on the radio. It's like, damn, so and so's couldn't even build a so and so DRS. Like he's just like, you guys are so useless. It's like he's so like, even though he's leading the championship right now, he's still
Yeah.
just like, like that, and it's again because I guess he knows what it's like as well, and he would have lived through that kind of period where Red Bull were with Renault and they had all the reliability issues. Like, was it like 2019? I want to say when they had the Renault engines and Ricardo was there, and they had maybe like 6 or 7 DNFs. So
Oh, so bad.
yeah, trust me. So
Yeah.
like taking a Mercedes hat off, I could see a young driver that's been through a lot of trauma,
Mhm.
and had a lot of things taken away from him, whether it's through his own doing or through stuff that was completely out of his control. So he's just not leaving anything to chance, and he just wants every single. He's just being ruthless, which, in this kind of like era, you need to be, because at least Mercedes and Lewis, they had such a strong synergy, and they were so clear of the rest. You could almost kind of have that kind of like thing to take it a bit more easy, or to be more experimental and to try different things. But with this season, it can just turn like that, and you've even got George Russell, which again, he's doing a phenomenal job. And it's not that I think he's beating Charles Leclerc or he's beating Verstappen. The car isn't at that level. But having said that, with the setups and with the more simplified things Mercedes are doing with his car, he's starting to get the results. And even he's got himself in that top four, top five kind of mix. So, on a day where something goes wrong with Max or something goes wrong with Leclerc, something happens with Checo or Science, I just don't know. For Science, I think Science needs to take a bath in some holy water because that guy right now he's like, that guy's just cursed. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I,
just
I
like,
agree with you on the George Russell take there. I mean, George has really impressed me. I mean, when he was driving with Williams, I always felt like he, he was a great driver. I did. I truly felt like it. And, for him to be able to extract the performance that he could out of that tractor, I mean, it was impressive. And I see him really maximizing the pace and the performance out of the car that he has from race to race. And they call him Mr. Consistency now, right? And it's well deserved. I mean, he has been consistent, and he's driven within the bounds of the car. And that is an extremely mature place to be at, right? Not to overstress or to overpush or to try to do something that the car just won't allow you to do. So he's driven within the bounds of the car, and it's been incredibly impressive to me.
This is exactly it as well, Doctor Obbs, and I agree with you in just terms of like he's been so mature with the way he's been driving, the way he's been dealing with the media as well as another thing we could touch on separately. But like you mentioned as well, just in the cockpit, in the car, you never see him kind of making radical mistakes or doing something over the top. I think he kind of got that out of his system whilst he was at Williams, and he had those mistakes, like the races at Imola, where he basically took out his predecessor in Valtteri Bottas, or the race even before that, where he dropped it under the safety car, and he could have got points there too. So he's been through his own fair share of kind of trauma and learning experiences. And then I always kind of felt sorry for him because, it's just like I always say, I always liken it to when you're at university and all your friends get their driving license before you do. They're driving around in the Honda Civics and Type R's and, and whatnot, and you're riding your bicycle, and you're just like, man, when am I finally gonna get my chance, to pass my driving test and drive one of the big boy whips? And then finally get one of the big boy whips, and it turns out it's not really a big boy whip anymore. So he's had to be patient, but you could see just he knows what the assignment is right now. He knows that there's no point trying to be take too much risk and destroy the car, because ultimately right now Mercedes' entire MO is a data gathering exercise. So
Hmm.
if you destroy or if you crash a car, then what data the team have, in comparison to what they're doing with Lewis's car, to then push the team forward in the future, especially with the limited testing time, limited wind tunnel time. The teams have the cost cap measures as well, which means you can't go crazy with, like, spending time doing experiments and stuff like that too. A lot
Yeah,
of
and that
stuff with
that right there is so important. Sorry to interrupt the cost cap
like,
before you move on. It is so important because if you crash your car and now you have to spend all this money to fix it, you use replacement parts, you're robbing yourself of performance. Potential future performance through upgrades and engineering, right? It's all coming from the same bucket. So exactly what Lewis and George are doing is exactly what you should do. Stay within the bounds of the car, don't bend it, and expose ourselves to additional costs that we simply couldn't use to then get to the performance levels that we think. So it's incredibly intelligent and incredibly smart and mature what they're doing.
so true, so true. And that's the thing as well. And I don't want to get onto like a granny bashing episode of looking at drivers like Mick, because we did that with Denny the other day, and it was a lot of fun. But again, this when you think that a driver like Mick Schumacher, yeah, he hasn't been in the sport as long as George, but there's maybe only a 2 or 3 year difference there. You see that George is able to pick his battles and kind of drive the car competitively enough to kind of keep his kind of like nose in there when there's opportunity for a podium. Whereas I don't know if you heard about this one, Doctor. It'd be interesting to get your view on this too. Obviously, Mick bin the car in Monaco, and Gunter Steiner was like, "Well, this is unacceptable. You can't keep crashing my cars. It's too expensive. You have to do better than that." So we've got to Baku, and then Mick's done the complete opposite now, and then he just wasn't pushing the boundaries enough, and around the circuit
Yeah.
like Baku, if you're not close to the walls, if you're not kind of using the track width of the circuit, if you're not really trying to go all out, you're gonna lose so much time. And he was not even a little bit off the pace, he is radically off the pace. To which Gunter Steiner also said, like, that's not good enough either. And if you can't find a middle ground, or if you're not like what is it, like story with the three bears, man, and the porridge.
Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Goldilocks. Exactly. If Mick Schumacher can't be Goldilocks and find the middle porridge, and like try and find like the balance between not crashing the car but being competitive, and trying to kind of at least match Magnussen, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Whereas the likes, let's say, of like a Lando Norris or George Russell, they're not in championship winning cars right now, but at least they kind of pick their fights a lot better, and they know when to hold them and when to fold them, and that's what I
Mhm.
admire. Even when you can't, it's harder to kind of compare them to a Charles or a Max because they don't have the car to compete with them yet. So
That's right.
it's so key. And yeah, I'll move on to the next segment. So I've actually got a fan question in. Love the fan questions, and this
Oh, I
one
love it
was
too. That's awesome.
they're amazing, aren't they? But yeah,
Yeah.
like this one was how can a driver manage tires whilst driving, and how does it affect the performance of the tire when you're not on the edge of its performance window? Which I thought was a really good question. So shout out to that person. But Dr. Obbs, I'll let you carry this one away.
That's a good question. Yeah, so there's a lot, you hear a lot about drivers managing tires. I think the biggest thing that probably the casual racing fan doesn't understand is that the drivers are not going as fast as they can during a race, right? You just simply can't go as fast as you can, because why, you'll end up wearing the tires down and taking all the usable life out of them, and then you have to make 3 4 pit stops in a race, right? And it's just not possible. So it's a balance of finding the performance limit while not extracting too much usable life out of the tires. And the reason is because as you use the tires, they heat up naturally, right? And the tires themselves are made out of a rubber compound, which as it heats up, it starts to flow or move. It's not quite like a liquid, but it's not like a solid either. It's like something in the middle. It's almost like putty. And as the tires overheat, they start to move a lot more. And as the tread, or not tread, there's no tread on a slick, but as the surface of the tire starts to sort of flow and move in the direction of, the lateral G's, which is, away from the apex corner, you start to lose parts of the tire. That's why during a race, when you see people offline, they pick up all those little marbles, because those are little bits of tire that have been sort of flowing and moving during a race, that by the time they get to the end of the tire, just fly off, and then you get those little marbles all over the car, and or sorry, all over the track. And so that is tire degradation. And if you're overstressing the tires, you're overheating the tires, and then now the tires are a lot softer and they're flowing more, so now a lot more usable uh, thickness of the tire for the actual, performance is now wearing away. And then you run a couple risks of either, not having enough tread or enough surface area of the tire to actually be able to grip the surface, because now you don't have enough thickness of that tire there, or you're going to risk a puncture, right? Which is what some people get, when you overstress a tire, then you end up, puncturing the tire. That's one thing. The thing that's quite interesting, and I'm going to draw this to what happened in Baku to Perez, is that when you are doing that, when you're pushing the car, so after Perez passed Leclerc, Perez was, I mean, he was on fire, right? He was like, his pace was rapid. So he was pushing. It's obvious that he was probably not doing such a good job. The tire whisperer, unfortunately, didn't do such a good job of whispering to his tires, and ended up overstressing him, which got him a bit hot. Then what ended up happening? You ended up having a virtual safety car. So when you have a virtual safety car, the speed drops, right, to your delta. And then at that point, your tires lose all their heat. So effectively, your tire that now was very hot has now cooled. And when your tire cools, what happens to the elastomer, or the rubber that's in there, is it's got a lot of these, I'm going to use a technical term here, okay? It's got cross-linking in the structure of the rubber, and when it's heated up, the bond strength of those cross links is less, which is why now the rubber is able to flow and move. But when it cools, it reestablishes those cross links. Okay, so the rubber regains its strength. And when it regains its strength, it's now harder. And whatever state your tire was in at that time, it reforms itself, it reshapes itself to that state. So now when you start to then, the virtual safety car is gone, and then now you put heat back into the tires, you then start to get graining, because all of these little flow patterns in your tire as the tire is moving have sort of hardened, and now you've got graining, and and your tire's done. I mean, sometimes you can work through the graining, and as you heat the tire back up, you can soften up kind of the graining on the tire, and then sort of as you go through the corners, it again flows to the outside of the car, and then you lose the graining, and then you can get the performance back. But that's not what happened to Checo. So that's a really long answer to that great question. I hope I answered it correctly.
I think you did, and it was an exceptional answer, if I must say so myself, Doctor Oz, because it was both on the technical kind of grounds of what actually happens with the tire as it's deconstructing, and you get that thermal wear that you mentioned too. but then also the kind of mechanical aspects of how the tire reacts when you're on the limit of pushing it, when you're outside of its operating window. And you see that drivers go about it in a different way. You gave the example with Perez in that situation as well under the virtual safety car. But then also, like, even Lewis, for example, too, like when you see Lewis, sometimes what he'll do during a stint, which is like what you mentioned as well, is he will not push 100%. He'll kind of push about 80%. And then obviously Mercedes fans will know about this legendary kind of thing of hammer time. And essentially Lewis
Yes.
confirmed in like an interview to Martin Brundle that that essentially is when Bono comes on the radio and they're thinking about pitting. So then they'll tell Lewis to use the rest of grip that he has
Exactly.
remaining in that tire, take out all the life from it, you know. And then when you do that, that's it. Like you can't get that grip back, and it's just interesting just to see how tires react in different conditions, like Dr. Obbs mentioned there too. And if you let them cool, then and you try to push again as well, then you get graining and blistering and these different things too, which is caused by different heat cycles. So it
Exactly.
definitely plays a huge role. And then obviously with this higher kind of like tire profile that we've got as well, and less flex in the sidewall, it has a lot of different, like, you know, characteristics and, you know, ways that it plays out too in terms of the strategy and how teams go racing. So yeah, really great question there. And you know, moving on to the next segment there, Dr. Obbs, let's do some F1 news. So I know we talked about the porpoising earlier as well, and that's been very interesting to see how it's going to play out for this race, and I guess more importantly, the ones coming up in the future. But another kind of development we had throughout the week was some more progress with the Kyalami Grand Prix potentially. So Stefano Domenicali flew out to Johannesburg and had a discussion with the organizers of the, I think it's the SAGP, the South African GP board, just in relation to things that they need to do still to get it signed off. I was reading a really good article. I'll need to kind of tell Jorgy who it was so she can credit them in the description. But ultimately, they were just saying that it's still not just down to, you know, FIA being on board with it or FOM. It's like maybe 5 or 6 contracts that need to be signed simultaneously just to even get an event like that to run. But you know, I mean, it's good that it's still being talked about. It's good that we're actually seeing physical action, because actions speak louder than words with these people. And you know, rather than it just being like, you know what, European, North American, and like like Middle Eastern like championship, now it can technically be a world championship because he'd be basically going to the majority of continents. But you know, I haven't ever had the opportunity to ask you, Dr. Obbs, what's your thought on, you know, us returning back to South Africa for Kyalami, and also kind of the caveat I wanted to throw you on this one. It may or may not be at the expense of Spa, which is, I guess, the more controversial one, and Poor Card, which again, you know, there are a lot of French people that obviously check Formula One, so shout out to all of your damn selves too. Big you up every time. But, you know, I mean, to be fair, Poor Card's never really given us the most amazing racing. But on the flip side, you know, French teams and French drivers do definitely hold a special place in Formula One. So if it's at the expense of losing one of the two of those Grand Prix or both, what's your take on that?
I mean, if first of all, I am in favor of increasing Formula One's global footprint where at all possible. I think bringing more attention to, you know, to South Africa and potentially, you know, stimulating the economy as well as a result of it, I'm for it. Like I'm all for it. Um, I think the thing that I also think about is we need to also find a way to balance it, because there will be a sustainability impact to it as well in terms of travel, right? You know, carbon emissions and carbon footprint, you know, moving equipment, you know, over such a long distance. So we need to think about how we can offset that as well a little bit. But if I had to pick, I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. I love Spa, so I think Spa must stay on the calendar. So I would lose, you know, the French Street GP as a result of it. And I actually, you know, was at in Pau, France, which I didn't know that in Pau they used to run the French GP in Pau before they had their new track that they run it at, and they used to call it Mini Monaco, and they actually had the track set up while I was there visiting for work, and because they were running some sort of historic races, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I mean, if they had to bring something back in France at a cheap cost, maybe they could go back to Pau and do some Mini Monaco stuff. But um, for me, you got to keep Spa. I mean, Spa is just it's part of F1, and I think it's racy as well. I mean, I understand people's beef with Monaco because Monaco is all about the show, I feel like, and less about the race. I mean, it's more about qualifying than the race, definitely.
Mhm.
Um, but to me, Spa is Spa, man. I mean, you got to keep Spa. So if it was me, I would definitely lose, the French GP as a result of that one. But I'm all for stimulating the economy, in South Africa as a result of this. I mean, it's a great track too. So I think it would be fun to see, these new cars on that track for sure. So I'm all for it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's intriguing there as well that you mentioned it as well, the doctors, because that's the thing with I think F1. Like, I feel it shouldn't be the case where you have to bring one in at the expense of two being moved off. And to be fair as well, I heard Thanos, shout out to Thanos as well. I think it's Thanos 876. It shouldn't be a thing where the fans are kind of blackmailed into accepting Kyalami or welcoming Kyalami at the expense of two other ones, because they didn't do that when it came to, them introducing, for example, Saudi Arabia or some of the Middle Eastern circuits. And it hasn't been the case either with Las Vegas. Las Vegas came in and it's not been at the detriment of losing any other Grand Prix. So it does kind of feel a bit weird how anytime Kyalami's mentioned in a sentence, there's always some kind of backlash, or there's always kind of some reason for why it shouldn't be ran. But I agree with you. It'd be great for the economy. It is be great for the team, like, and F1's history as well, because people have to remember, yes, Las Vegas is cool, and actually there have been historic races at Las Vegas. Yes, in a way, Saudi Arabia is cool, and it's interesting to see another night race and cars kind of like F1 in places it wouldn't normally be. But we've had history with Kyalami. We've had history with South African drivers and Jody Scheckter.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of iconic moments, involving South Africa and just the racing there too. And I know that it's still, like we said, a couple of things that need to be done. I think the circuit also requires a grade one FIA license to be run there. But again, Zandvoort didn't have like a grade one license either, and they threw money into like basically redeveloping it, repurposing it for Formula One cars. And that's probably to his credit because of one driver, because there's only one driver that's relevant in Formula One right now, and he drives a Red Bull. And they did that because they knew that the economy and kind of the economic point would be huge, because like Max is doing so well right now at Red Bull. And that's always the case when Michael Schumacher was doing well. The German Grand Prix used to sell out. When Fernando Alonso was doing well, the Spanish Grand Prix used to sell out, and it's always the case. And even with Italian culture, when I'm sure when Valentino Rossi was winning all the MotoGPs, you couldn't even fit your face, in any of the Italian Grand Prix, because it would just be packed. So yeah, I think they just need to just accept Kyalami and continue doing the works that they're doing to make it happen. And I don't think it's one they'll ever regret, because it's just gonna be phenomenal. The tourism, just the economy, like you mentioned as well, it'd be huge. And actually, a good, like, Dr. Obbs, I feel like you and the guests, it's like you guys hack into my PC and you see like my little like notepad with my scripts and my stuff like that. Because honestly, you guys see everything. And like, this is probably the best segue I'm gonna do on this one. Is you touched there about the sustainability of Formula One flying out to different countries, and like basically the efficiency of doing so, and making sure that our carbon footprint is still managed in doing that. A great kind of point I wanted to make there as well is, Sebastian Vettel was in the UK a couple of weeks ago. He was on a very popular debate talk show called Question Time on the BBC, where a lot of politicians get grilled, as they should, you know. for lying to the people, and just generally just like there's lots of debates about the environment and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of I wanted to just pick your brains on that as well, Dr. Obbs, on just F1's effects on being more green for the environment, and trying to keep up with the number of races, but then trying to reduce on like the global kind of like I guess footprint that they have, and just generally where we stand. Because my
Yeah.
kind of take on it is that Formula One is incredible. You've got these 1,000 horsepower beasts, setting times, that are like crazy. Like it's almost unheard of at the times that they're doing. But they've got the most efficient engines in the world. It's like a 1.6. Just to put into context, like my C43, I want to be a Vincenzo and be an AMG snob. Like my AMG has a V6 engine, and so does a Formula One car. And my V6 engine has two turbos, whereas like maybe a Formula One car only has one turbo. And my AMG has a 3 liter engine, and the Mercedes hybrid engine is a 1.6 liter engine. Yet my car only produces like 400 horsepower, and Mercedes F1 car produces over 1,000 horsepower. So they're the most efficient engines you could potentially have, for the amount of power and performance they could deliver at any one single moment of time. But yeah, it's crazy too, because then you have all like these teams and stuff and trainers and catering and media, and it's like a circus. So Dr. Obbs, like, how did the teams, how does the sport continue to like make it sustainable, but at the cost of like not affecting, what is F1 and what is the culture and what is the spectacle?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question we should all be asking. I made a post about this on my Twitter. For those of you that maybe don't that are listening and don't follow, it's Dr._Obbs, but specifically on this. And one of the things that I found that I thought was quite eye-opening was that I don't know how many people know, but F1 has a sustainability target, right? For them, they want to be net zero carbon footprint by 2030. What does net zero mean? Net zero means that, in their carbon emissions and their carbon savings, when you equate these two things together, they end up being, net zero carbon emissions. So from that side of things, they have a very clear objective, and I think it's the right objective. Now, whether or not they can achieve that, obviously, remains to be seen. But one of the things that I posted about that I think is quite eye opening is that in 2019, F1 released their report on their carbon emissions, like where are they emitting carbon, right? Um, and you know what the power unit emissions was? So percentage out of 100% of the carbon emissions for all of F1. What percentage do you think the power unit emissions were? Just a guess.
For maybe two, maybe zero, maybe 1%. How
Yeah,
many?
so 1% would be close. It's 0.7%.
Jesus.
I mean, a tiny amount is coming from the cars. I mean, you hear a lot of people talking about, oh, well, this driver drives around in a car that moves around on the track that, emits all this carbon. It's 0.7% of the carbon emissions for Formula One. So I know we're focusing a lot on what we're doing with the power units and the type of fuel and things like that, but everybody needs to realize for the sport of Formula One, we're attacking a problem that is only 0.7% of the problem. So that's the first thing. And then after that, the next highest is what's called event operations. So 7.3% for anything that's related to the broadcasting, the support races, the paddock, setting up the paddock, the carbon that you're going to have in setting up the paddock, the energy use at the circuit. It's only 7.3%. Okay. And then after that, it's 19.3% for the facilities and the factories. So all of the teams, anything that's all F1 owned or operated offices, facilities, and all the team owned operations, Brackley, Milton Keynes, all that, right? Taking into account the power that they use, the energy that they use, everything. That's 19.3%. And then after that, the next highest is 27.7%, which is for business travel. Okay, so all of the travel that's required for now, the teams, the personnel, everybody to fly to their destinations, and not just the races, but also to any events. Like if F1 is having, the award show or whatever, right? The award ceremony, all of it. Nearly 30% of the carbon emissions for F1 is just from moving people around. And then the rest, 45%, is logistics. That's road transport, air transport, sea transport for all of the equipment that needs to go race to race. That's why, I mean, over 70%, nearly 75% of the carbon emissions of F1 is from moving people and things around. That's why the calendar is so important. Because when we spend so much, sorry, I'm getting really passionate right now. I'm
Go
sure
for
you
it,
can
Doctor. We love
I'm,
this.
I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. Um, but that's why, when we spend a lot of time talking about, the type of fuel that we're going to use or what we're going to do with the engines and things like that, I get it. From my tech head side, like I'm there for it. I love it. But we're attacking the wrong problems. We need to attack the right problems, which is the calendar first and foremost. How can we create a calendar that is more environmentally friendly? I mean, a great example is what we're doing here, right? Where we're going from Baku, from Azerbaijan, all the way to Montreal, and then now to Silverstone next, right? I mean, what can we do with the arrangement of the calendar so that we can move people around less, or we can have a lot more of the events that occur, in close combination to each other, to where teams are not having to fly back and forth too much. I do understand there's a human element to this, because if you've got 3 races in a row and they're all occurring, say, in North America, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep, the teams away from their families for an entire month, right? And not allow them to fly back home, in between races? I understand there's a human element to that. So we need to think about that as well. But what can we do to be more responsible with the calendar? I think that's the first place that we need to start. And the next place that we need to look at now is what can we do in terms of, how many people do we need at a race that now requires all the business travel that we have? What can we do to maybe reduce the amount of back and forth trips? As far as the logistics go, I think teams are naturally doing what they want, what they can, to try to reduce the cost of logistics, because, oh, by the way, logistics is also part of the cost cap. So this is why Red Bull and Mercedes and everybody is talking about inflation as well, is because you can see the carbon emissions usually tells you where you're spending all your money as well, by the way, because that's fuel that's burning off and everything, that's happening as a result of that. So you're spending a lot of money on logistics. So I think there's a benefit to the teams that could be that not only would we address the sustainability questions with carbon emissions by having a more carbon friendly calendar, but we could also potentially reduce the costs that the teams have to exert as a function of, the logistical aspects of the calendar itself as well. So we could kill 2 birds with one stone. And I think F1 is looking at that, right? There's a lot more pressure, but I think we need to keep the pressure on for them to do it.
I think so too, Dr. Obbs. I think it comes around everywhere because, kind of to circle back to how I opened this question, like Seb was on this TV program, and one of the fans, in the typical thing we just talked about as well, like, oh, you're an F1 driver, you're creating the pollution, aren't you a hypocrite because you're talking about environmental change, but then you're flying everywhere in the country. It's my best impression, by the way, but
That was pretty good.
thank you. But but yeah, like what I was so proud of Seb for was he didn't rise to like the person trying to troll him on the TV show, and he said, "Listen, I'm guilty. I am a hypocrite, because yes, there's things which I'm doing, which is completely the kind of like polarizing opposite of what I want to achieve, but." I'm not sitting down on my ass and doing nothing either. I care about these causes and the things that we need to do, whether it's as a sport in terms of how we organize or structure or make the sport run fundamentally, And also, because so many people watch the sport, we can use it as a platform to bring awareness to other things
Absolutely.
too. And I think, even this week, he's got a completely new again. Like, imagine if he was like, I mean, he was there anyway, but I think, do you remember that time in F1 where the drivers weren't allowed to change their helmets? They had to have the same fundamental design for the entire season. He must have hated that because now that you got, basically a peacemaker Seb, like every week he's got a different design helmet. And this week he touched on like something about like, I don't know the full story. So please forgive me, listeners, for this. But vaguely what it's about is there's some cause to do with like trees, because they're gonna cut down some trees to like start some sort of business or some sort of commercial kind of like thing. And obviously, yeah, cut down the trees and stuff like that. But when you do that, you're essentially messing up the infrastructure or the landscape of the land. B, you're messing up the ecosystem for the animals and stuff that have to live in the trees and stuff like that. And then C, if you're gonna do stuff like that, what are you then doing to kind of reimburse or like remunerate nature? Are you gonna plant back those trees? Or what are you doing to kind of like put back the earth as you found it in, to make the
Yeah.
earth in the best state, so there's so much that the FIA and so much F1 could do, and I think they want to do it. It's just sometimes they could be very lackadaisical. I think even with them, they bite off more than they can chew, and then it becomes a project of, ooh, maybe we got into this too deep, and maybe we should just think. But that's why I'm so happy we got the likes of Lewis and we got the likes of Seb that will push them, to consider how they go about doing things and make them do things in a different way. And it's not only just for the benefit of the environment, but also the benefit of the sport too, because if you could run a sport like you mentioned, but you can do it at a fraction of the cost, or you can reduce overheads, or you can improve the quality of life, all of the mechanics and team that work so hard by having all of the races that are on one continent, kind of like back to back with each other, rather than flying to A to then go to Z to then go to R to then go to B to then go to Q. Like it's just more
Exactly.
logical that way. So yeah,
Yeah,
it makes
absolutely.
sense.
And I love the drivers being so outspoken. I really do. I think they've got a platform. And I don't care if you're an F1 driver, if you're playing in the NBA, if you're playing in the Premier League or whatever. I mean, if you've got a platform and you have an opportunity to change things or to raise awareness on social topics, absolutely do it. And I love to see that. um, something that you mentioned, about carbon credits basically is what you're talking about. How do you offset carbon with you know carbon savings or carbon credits they call it. That's definitely some things that the teams can also look into. I know a lot more of the teams themselves as well, by the way. Their facilities, they're doing a lot to offset carbon by going to solar power and things like that, right, in their facilities, or using more sustainable building materials, which is fantastic as well. So I'm here for it. I mean, I think, we need to keep pressing on a lot of these social issues, obviously our environment being a big part of that. And we all have a role to play. And I think I'm going to hold, F1 accountable to it as well, So, I mean, I don't know how little old me can do it, but I'm still going to talk about it. So, hopefully people will listen, and it's great to see the drivers talking about it as well.
Absolutely, and Dr. Obbs, don't belittle yourself like that, man. Like like you have a voice as well, and it's the amazing work that you, Bryson, all the guys, from the DRS zone, to like everybody has like a part to play in it. And if we've seen it, we've seen the aftermath of Abu Dhabi and how through talking about it and being persistent, you might not get the result that you want, but at least you can go down knowing that you did something to affect change, or you
That's
tried to
right.
do something to bring awareness to it. And the more of us that come together on these like great platforms, and we speak about these things, the louder our voices are.
That's
So
right. And a
it's
lot of the
just
technology from Formula One, by the way, is going into these constructors' cars. A lot of the technology from Formula One's going into Mercedes cars. It's going into, I don't know about Ferraris, but
oh
and
gosh.
when Porsche gets in, and Audi gets in, I mean, a lot of this technology for, hybrid systems and things like that, are coming into, road vehicles as well. So we can't ignore the fact that this sport is also being used to develop technologies that are going to also affect our road cars as well, and make them more efficient road cars.
Absolutely. I mean, if we want to really go down the technical route there, doctors, we absolutely could because it's a fact, And I mean, like from the Mercedes point, I can speak about that a bit more. Not so much Ferrari because the car probably wouldn't make it off the dealership, caught based on the reliability they have. Bless them. But no, like I've been following AMG, and again, I just want to get your thoughts on this as well. Actually, just on a side tangent, there's this whole kind of thing within the AMG culture that AMG has to have a V8 engine and it's going to be naturally aspirated. But AMG have come out and said that they're not doing that anymore. From 2030, they're going to try and just move away from combustion engines. But for the time being, between now and then, they don't want to like go with these big kind of high displacement engines. So they're moving away from the V8 format and their most beloved car, the C63, from now on, like all AMGs or at least kind of flagship ones, they're gonna have like a four-cylinder engine with some sort of like hybrid kind of like elements or components. And with the C63 that's gonna be coming out shortly, it's the first car to have an electric turbine. Or a turbocharger. So with that, it has a completely revolutionized turbo system that rather than just relying on the exhaust gases, it uses kinetic energy and other kind of modes of like harvesting energy to spin the turbo to give you additional boost and power. And all of this like technology has been derived from the Mercedes EQ boost program, which obviously AMG ran with the W10, the W9, and the W8 as well. So, and even again, another thing, I mean, I'd known about this car for like 6 years and AMG kept damn teasing me about it. But then also you've got the hypercar, you've got the Mercedes Project One, which is literally,
Mhm.
like Lewis Hamilton's 2016 engine, put into a road legal car, which is crazy to me, and even that car, it's not just like a high performance car, but it's got EV mode as well. So it can run completely on just electrical power. A hypercar can do that,
That's
And then I
amazing.
don't know if you've also been following BMW. BMW announced that they're going to take part in Le Mans and the IMSA American Series with like
Hmm.
a V8 hybrid engine. And that's super cool because we haven't had BMW in Formula One now for years. So to see them in other motorsport disciplines and to see them picking up the torch, it's huge. And you mentioned Porsche as well. Again, they're doing amazingly too. And like they obviously had the 919 series. I think they set the world record around Spa, with that like non-homologated hypercar, which was crazy. It could take
Yeah.
corners almost as quick as a Formula One car. But then you've got the Porsche 918 Spider, which again is a V8 like derived like power unit with hybrid components too. So it's really a huge technical engineering push to see what the teams are doing. And it's not going to stop there either, and it's fascinating. And I know that, there's a lot of old school AMG guys out there saying, no, it's not really AMG. Real AMG goes rum. And like the new AMGs, they're EVs, so they don't make any noises, blah, 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 blah. But these newer cars, Dr. Obbs, as you know, they're probably going to be even quicker than like the current combustion engine cars because there'll be no turbo lag. Like when you have this electrical cars, there's no gearbox or any like transmission loss. The torque is like it's immediate. So
That's
it's
right.
so fascinating.
Yeah, Denz, you nailed it, man. That is a perfect explanation. That is really, really good. Exactly. I mean, what you might have maybe, been sacrificing and going with a smaller displacement or a lower displacement engine, 6-cylinder, 4-cylinder, and then strapping on turbos with turbo lag, you no longer have because of these, electric turbos or pre-spun electric turbos that don't rely as much on the exhaust gases. Um, I've had both, in my life. I had a Mustang Cobra, which was like V8 just monster, and then I had a Super Turbo, which was like a V6, turbocharged car with lag, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. I think the purist in me is always going to be like, you know oh man, I want something that's classic, that's got a big old engine in it, but what it's just not sustainable for road cars and for the future, right? And so we can extract even more performance from these power units that have less displacement and now have a lot more of these, hybrid systems on them. And you can run it up against something with a V8, and you'll smoke them around the track, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's all about, what can we do to be socially responsible with the vehicles. And you're 100% right. Formula One technology has made its way into road cars. Maybe some cars that we can't quite afford yet. I can't quite afford yet,
Well,
but
we'll get there.
maybe
We'll
one
start
day.
GoFundMe. We'll start that GoFundMe. Don't worry, Dr. Obbs. We'll get there. We will get
Right.
there. But no, you're right, and that's the thing. I mean, yes, it's in the higher kind of flagship models too, but there'll become a time where it's gonna, enter the entry level stuff too. And that's always the case with technology. You'll see it again, not being a the Mercedes guy I am, but usually with Mercedes, they'll throw all the like high specification stuff in the S class, which is the big 120 grand limousine, and then over time that technology comes into the E class, which like the chauffeur car, then the C class, which is like what a peasant like me can afford, and even the A class, which is like a little kind of like compact hatchback. And over time, you see that the technology this becomes more and more refined, and there's other ways of doing it. So it's crazy, but it's just such an exciting time really to be alive, because like like even just in terms of just like computers, for example, like we had obviously like the huge big back kind of like PCs. Then in the early 90s you had the development of the internet. Then you obviously had PCs, laptops, sorry, and now obviously now you have iPads. It's like, even if you just take it out of motorsport, you just look at technology on the whole and how things have changed. Even for me, just being a 90s baby, it's nuts just to kind of like watch the rate and see just how things have progressed in such a short period of time. And, just how quickly the world develops and it evolves and it adapts to different, circumstances, whether they're financial or whether they're like, environmental in that sense too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saying that you're a '90s baby though, Denz, depresses me because I was,
I have to do
uh,
this every time you and
I
F1
was,
Black come on the show. I have to make you guys feel old. That's
I
just
was
the
born
rule.
in the late '70s, so for me, it's like, yeah, it's depressing. But
Man,
I
you had
remember,
your chance, man. There are amazing bands and groups and different eras. Man, I don't feel sorry for you, bro. I'm
yeah,
joking, but nah,
no,
just
but I remember a
sorry,
time when I couldn't walk around on a phone, talking on a phone without it being corded, right? And and then, you know what I'm saying? So it's like you're right. I mean, the rate of innovation and technology, man, it's what brought me into engineering. Is that, I mean, if you're somebody that loves technology, I mean, engineering is where it's at. And I work in the energy industry, and people when we talk about sustainability and such will be like, oh, you're the enemy, you're you're the devil, you work in the energy industry. But people don't realize how much the energy industry has brought into sustainability as well, whether it's like offshore wind farms, or it's the ability to create energy from waves and things, which is crazy when you think about it. um, so there's a lot of things, the battery technology as well. A lot of it has come from the energy industry that electric vehicles now use as well. So there's a lot of things that come from different industries, that technologies and advancements and things. And the future is so incredibly bright. I mean, I think about I've got 3 kids, and I think about what my kids are going to experience in their lifetime, and it just blows my mind. And I'm here for all of it, man. I think our mindset is right. We're thinking about the environment when we're doing these innovations, which is fantastic, and we're thinking about just increasing, our happiness, our mental health, our mental well-being as well along the way. It's no longer that we're doing innovation and sacrificing people's well-being or mental health as a result of it, right? We're not working you know 80, 90 hour weeks anymore. We're actually prioritizing mental health along the way, which I think is perfect. So we're finding a good balance.
and it's so key as well. And you mentioned that, and it's just how efficient things have become. Like we don't do the whole 90 kind of 100 hours a week because we've just found ways to be more efficient, and there's so many different ways that in the bright lights, humanity has stepped up and made some really revolutionary changes to how we live life. But yeah, I mean, also, I guess people will be the realists as well out there, be quick to say there are other things that need to improve. And maybe we need to have a separate episode on that too, because there's just a lot
Yeah.
of wild things happening. But to wrap this episode up as well, Dr. Obbs, we'd be remiss if we didn't go through predictions. And I don't know when Jorgy's going to drop this episode, but hopefully it will be not too long or not too far away from Canada, or well, actually the Canadian Grand Prix event in itself. But predictions, Dr. Obbs. You got quali, you got the race. We've got a lot of like very funny kind of weather in and around the area as well, with Friday being almost completely, or I think Thursday completely flooded out. So yeah, just predictions, man.
Yeah, so I was on the DRS zone earlier this week, and I gave some predictions before Charles Leclerc taking the taking the new power unit. So
Whew.
I'll have so if anybody's listening to the DRS zone and this episode, they're gonna probably call me a hypocrite because I'm gonna contradict myself now. Um, but I guess what I'll say is this: I think for quali, I think Charles, I think is going to be on top of quali. I think Max is going to be right behind him. A new power unit for Ferrari is going to be super strong. I know Max took a new power unit in Baku, right? So his power unit's not that old, but um, for me, it's going to be quali's going to be Charles, and then it's going to be Max, and then I think there's going to be a surprise. I want Checo to be right there. I really do, but I think there's going to be a bit of a surprise. I'm not sure Checo will get that one lap pace, so it could be Sainz, or we could have a surprise like maybe an Alonso or a Vettel, possibly up at number 3. So that's going to be my stretch. My stretch for the third position in quali might be either Vettel or Alonso. Then in the race is going to be really interesting because Charles is going to take that 10th place grid penalty, which means then if Max is second in quali, he's going to be then P1 to start the race, and then is Checo going to be able to get up front to be able to help Red Bull kind of have that 1-2, and are they going to race each other? Where's the pace going to be at between the two of them? So then, as a result of that, now I think Max will probably be, P1. For P2, for me, I think it's going to be Checo because I think Checo's going to find the setup that's going to put him close enough in quali, maybe, but that he'll have really good race pace. So then I think Checo will be number 2. And I think number 3 actually will be Sainz. But
Needs it.
I'm taking a leap of faith there. So my man better not screw this one up for me.
Screw you over on that one.
Yeah. But the other thing that I think I'm really keen to watch out for is what is Mercedes going to be able to do from now until qualifying. FP3 is going to be so important, and there's a lot of rumors that free practice 3 is just going to be a monsoon. I don't know if those weather predictions have changed or not, but if they end up canceling FP3 or we lose FP3, that will be killer. That will be an absolute killer for Mercedes because I think Mercedes is really needing to do some work to find good one lap pace and then find good race pace. So if we lose FP3, then unfortunately, I think it's going to be a bit of a struggle for Mercedes. But if we have FP3 and they're able to find a good setup, I'd look for George to be quite racy and could sneak a podium in there again. If some things happen there, but watch out for Vettel and watch out for Alonso. When it comes to the race, I have a little less faith in the Alpine because of the fact that they're just going low downforce, low drag, and the expense is at the tires, which means that they're going to be chewing through their tires like they did in Baku again. So um, we could be seeing something in their pace right now that might not be sustainable for a race. So then for the race, I'm just going to say Max, Checo, and Sainz.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable prediction as well there, Dr. Obbs, and some really great insights there too, because like you said, a lot of it's going to come down to who's going to be able to get their setup perfect. You got to factor in as well that like Leclerc obviously has a fresh engine, so it should give him a bit more power. But then on the converse side, he's got that grip penalty, so there's that also. It's going to make the race quite spicy too. You got Latifi and Stroll in a home Grand Prix. That could get spicy for reasons I'm not going to get into. And yeah, just like you mentioned there too, George is on like a run of form, but then also Lewis always historically he's gone quite well at Canada. It's one of his favorite circuits, but like you also mentioned, it's going to come down to whether or not they have the FP3 and they can use that. Because another heartbreaking thing is they did an interview with Lewis, and I'd never seen him so
Oh,
deflated. My
it was
God,
so
just
depressing, man. Oh,
yeah, like this is it was the sigh as well. It was like, this
yeah.
car is so bad. I was like, Jesus Christ. And that's the thing as well. Like when you look at that car, it's like, why? Like you have everything going for you. You're pretty, like you're low to the ground, like everything just it's giving this comparison I think to F1 Jordan the other day. It's like the W13 is like that girl in school you have a crush on, but she's just bad for your health. Like she's just really bad for your health. It's like she's the girl you shouldn't really like. But yeah, just
And
Mercedes
she's
just come.
moody, she's temperamental, right? So hard to get
Oh
into a good
gosh,
operating window.
exactly. Like diva. Oh, this is beyond diva levels now. This is a different This is like Eddie Van Halen in Van Halen when he's like, yeah, I only want red M&Ms, and if you don't put red M&Ms inside my bowl, I'm just gonna like trash the hotel. This is that level, you know. In fact, that's giving me an idea, Georgie. You know, when I get my Ben and Jerry's, I only want. What's the flavor you recommended, Doctor Obbs?
Chubby hubby.
I only want Chubby Hubby judging, yeah? Any other flavor that can't run, or else I'm destroying the hotel, I'm destroying the podcast room. I'm joking, but no, like, yeah, just it's a interesting one. Like you said, Alpine are there, literally, like, legitimately as well. And then also you've got the likes of like Aston Martin, which is still trying to learn their car. Again, you've got like obviously Alfa Romeo, which if the car's reliable, they can do something. You've got so many different variations, and now the weather that could play a part in it too. So, it's gonna be an interesting one. And I think what just adds to the kind of magic to it as well is for us, like we're gonna be watching it like borderline in the evening in the night, Dr. Up. So for like our time difference, I think it's gonna be like
Mhm.
8 or maybe like 9. So you're gonna have your whole day just doing your thing, and then you're gonna have that in the afternoon to look forward to as well, which
I
always
know we can get
great.
stuff done during the day now, right? So
Exactly. We have no excuse not to get stuff down now. That's
exactly.
basically the excuse. So yeah, but no, Dr. Obbs, it's been legendary to have you on as usual. I'm gonna have to have you back again, hopefully next month or whenever you're free to join us. And for the listeners at home, tell them what the handles are again, social media handles.
It's Dr._Obbs. Come give me a follow, y'all.
You heard what the man said. Go follow him for all your F1 tech needs, wants, questions, answers. He's the GOAT. So make sure you go and follow him. And Dr. Obbs, pleasure as always to have you on. It's been brilliant. You've brightened up my Saturday already. I'm ready. Got lots of energy. I don't know if that's going to be the case later today with this W13, but we move. It
We
is what it
move.
is, as
Yep.
they say. But yeah, everyone listening as well, if you got to the end, please, tell us what you thought of this episode as well. Always lovely seeing your comments. Make sure you go and subscribe as well to the YouTube channel. I see the numbers going up and up and up, which we love to see exponentially, using the fancy words. And of course, shout out Georgina, the boss, although she
The
got caught in
boss.
4K, without my ice cream. So come here, holla, Georgina. I'm coming to get you. Coming to get my ice cream. But on that bombshell, it's been stripping the dip in. It's been your boy AMG Denz, hashtag AMG Denz now. See me rolling in a white C43. Oh yeah. Until next time, catch you guys soon. Peace.